Access 2007 Advanced Reports. What better way to show your audience what you're trying to show them than with a chart? Here we're going to create a pivot chart which allows us to compare various fields in our underlying data source, filter information, see a graphical representation. So within, 20 seconds, someone can look at that report, that pivot chart, and say, well, I see the bananas are our top seller and we need to order some more carrots from this vendor. Pivot charts are a fantastic way to represent data to your audience. You can also insert a sub-report into a master report, just like we did when we had sub-forms. We can work with controls. We can even add buttons into reports that will allow us to open up a form and edit it right on the spot before we print out that output. Everything in a report has its own set of properties, and here we'll look at some of the items that will be helpful before you print out that report and hand it to the decision maker in your company. We are going to jump on into Access now. Here is the Zoo database, and to create a pivot chart, just like a lot of the other objects, the first thing you need to do is select your data source. So I am going to work with a query called Food Orders Complete. Let's look at that query first. We have a unique ID, what we ordered, when we ordered it, how many, and who from, as well as the addressing information and the price. All right, let's close this query and get down to business. First, select the source, then go to the tool. The command is on the Create ribbon, and it's right here. Okay, it's in the Forms area. Don't be alarmed. Access, Microsoft considers this a form. What? We're in Advanced Reports. Well, the tactic that I'm taking here is reports are for output. We are going to use these charts to print out and hand off to people to understand our data. Therefore, I'm categorizing this in our report area. If you're taking the exam, chances are you're not going to have to differentiate, okay, a pivot chart, is it a form or is it a report? You're just going to need to know why you'd ever want to use it and how you can use the various controls that exist within it. So let's click on that pivot chart button, and we have a blank pivot chart to start with. We have to add some fields. We have the field list button here on the design ribbon, and now the fields that are displayed are specifically related to that underlying query, Food Order Complete. So we need to have some fields that are going to display data for us. First of all, what are we doing here? Well, we want to take a look at the various foods we ordered, the quantity per month, and the vendors that we ordered them from. So I'd like to see the food name displayed. That'll be what we can filter by at the top. We want to see only bananas, for example. It's a good idea to always have time as your x-axis. And because Access took a look at our data, it's able to order our order dates either by week or by month. If I click on this plus, I see that I could even choose years or quarters or get down into minutes or seconds. You have to know your data to make this work. For us, months will be most appropriate. I'll click and drag it into the category field. Now we still don't see anything because we haven't chosen what data we actually want to see. That will be food name as well because we're interested in how many bananas we ordered in January. Look at that. We ordered about 10 bananas in January. Here is the quantity, the numbers here, and this is a count up of all the food items. I could right click on this and I could change my auto calculate to be something different. My data, I can only count that because it's not a numerical field. But if you were looking at something like price or square footage, then you could do something like summing or minimum, seeing the maximum value, the average, and so on down the line. We'll stick with count because we have no other option here. I'll click to close that menu. And now, how would we like to see this information? I'd like to see it broken out by vendor. I'm going to click to contract this area so I can see company better. We call our vendor company here. When I click and drag it there, now I see the various orders that went to various vendors. I have no filters here. I am simply looking at all of our orders from January through August. If I were to see just the bananas, I could click up here in the filter area. Because I have all selected, I'm seeing all. I could remove the check mark from all, or I could just remove the check marks one by one until I got to the selections that I wanted. I'll just select bananas and then click OK. Now I'm seeing only my banana orders. I'm going to go back and choose all again and click OK. Now I could choose just to see certain vendors. Maybe I'd only like to see my farm produce orders. Okay, here we go. So now, see how valuable these pivot charts can be? You get to see all the data, your working set of data, and then you get to filter and work with it to make it say what you want it to say. Then you print it out, and your audience knows very quickly what it is that they need to know. This, by the way, is the same chart program that's been in the Microsoft Office suite forever, since 97 or 95, it's been part of that suite. So if you've ever worked with charts in Word, PowerPoint, Excel, or even Access before, it's that very same program, so it works the same way. I'm going to close this chart field list and show you what I mean by that. Here on this design ribbon, we have the property sheet, the same property sheet that we always have, and we can make changes to items. For example, if I select this area here, I'm selecting the whole chart, and I can change what my plot area is. I can make tweaks to it. I can change the border of the entire thing. If I selected this red because I don't like red, now I can make changes to the color. And if I were to be printing out on a black and white printer, I could change it from a solid color to a pattern. That way, the various shades of gray would be broken out by different patterns and therefore easier to understand for my audience. So what I'm getting at here are the properties work the same as they always have with charts and the same within Access, in that you select an item and it will show you what it is you can change. From there, you make that selection, like font here, for example. So you have your property sheet. We already took a look at auto calculate. Also, if I wanted to switch my row and my columns around, instead of having months, I could see my vendors. I'll just click that and it switches it. So now I see all my vendors here, and I could break this out by months in a different way. But I like it the way that I set it up. The refresh pivot is in case there's data that's changing. When you click refresh, it'll go back to the base query, which is based off a table, and it will pull in the new information. I like the legend here on the design ribbon because now I see, oh, we're talking about blue here. Well, that's Sakana Fresh orders for July. Drop zones are selected because that's what we're seeing here. I could always go back to the field list. I could drag an item off and drag a new item back on if I'm not happy with this pivot chart. And this is all you have to work with here for the pivot chart. All these other ribbons are back to our basic database tools that we always have available to us. Back into the design ribbon, just because that's the best place to be when you're in charts. Now I'll click the Save button, and I will call this pivot chart. Pivot chart, okay. And I've been mentioning that you'd probably want to print this out. So how do you do that? You go to your Office button. From here, you have print as a choice. I can print preview, and I can send it right to a printer or right to the default printer. If you're used to the Control P on your keyboard, that does work here as well. The last thing I'll show you is this chart type is grayed out until I double click on that chart, and now I can change the chart type. I have about 75 different types of charts that I could select. We have a column chart here, but I could make that a 3D column chart. If I go into 3D view, I can even rotate it a little bit. I can change the incline. Look at that. It's just amazing what you can do. Changing the colors and the borders here is also a possibility. So change chart type does allow you to have line charts, pie charts, bubble charts, all sorts of different charts. The point here is understanding your data so that you can print it out and represent it in the proper way. For example, if I printed this out, would anybody really understand it? Perhaps not. I think this is not so glamorous, but it does get the point across. All right, let's close out this pivot chart. Just to show you where it ends up, it does end up in the forms area. So technically it's a form, but because we're representing data to an audience, it's for output. You can't input data into a pivot chart. You can just manipulate it. That's why I consider it a report. Our next goal is to create a sub-report. So first things first, let's go ahead and create a report from Design View. And let's go to our Add Existing Fields. We are going to have vendors, and then we'll have our sub-report be our order. So I'll double-click on Vendor ID, and then I'll select Company, Address, City, State, and Zip Code. I can click and drag them out here. And everything's kind of a jumbled mess, but I just want to show you how easy it is to make this a tabular format. I select everything that I want to have in tabular format. This button, by the way, on the design ribbon also is for selecting all. To my arrange ribbon, I can choose tabular, and it bumps everything up. I have some work to do here, but I have all my headers that will be the page header, my labels, and then all my data will be in the detail area. So I do want to move this over here a little bit, and because we have all this space, I'm going to just select this information, click and drag it up here, and we can go into, I'll select this report, I can go into auto format and select something like that. Because we're talking about a report here, it didn't turn everything this taupe color like it would in a form, because Access understands your output is meant to be on a piece of paper, not on the screen, and you don't want to waste all that ink that's going to give you that nice taupe background. Just really the font is what changed here. When I go to my home ribbon and go into report view, I see, it's not really so pretty. I could make some extra changes to it. Looks like I need to resize some items here as well, and it bumped vendor ID to the far left. I'll go back into design view. I'll keep it like it is, though. Please remember that there are more nuggets in this series, and there is one that's dedicated towards formatting your fields and working with them so that it is going to be eye-catching, because we don't want something that is hard to understand or really just not very attractive. But our goal here is to add a sub-report. So I have my vendor information here, and now I want to add a sub-report. The tool is on the design ribbon in the controls. It's called Subform Sub-Report. We did use this in a previous forms nugget. It works the same way. I can draw it, or I could just click and let it resize it for me. My choices for data sources are tables and queries, and I could choose the fields that I want, or I pre-planned this a little bit, and I'm going to choose an existing report that I already created. So food orders sub-report, I'll choose next. And it's saying, okay, well, I need these records to link up. When I'm printing this out, how should I rearrange this order? Is there some semblance to this data? I do want to show food orders for each record using the vendor ID, is what that says. Although I could define my own and select vendor ID and vendor, because those do match up. Either way, Access gives me the best guess. None is not recommended. It's just going to spit out all that data without tying your vendor ID to the orders that go with that vendor ID, which really is the point of our report. I'll choose next. It's going to call it food orders sub-report. I'm going to call this orders by vendor sub-report. Finish. It's time to take a look at this. Notice how I have that grayed out because my sub-report is what's selected. I'll click to deselect everything. Now I can go into report view, and it's, again, not so pretty, but we see our vendor information up here, and then our orders are broken out by that vendor. So tropical nutrients, here are all the orders for tropical nutrients. I can scroll down, and I have my cattle ranchers, and these are all the orders for cattle ranchers. I'll go back into design view. I haven't done this in a while. I can use these buttons down here in the bottom right to do that. I'm going to remove this label. I think it was unnecessary. And I could go back into this base report and make some tweaks to it, but I'm going to leave it the way that it is at this point in time. Keep in mind, everything you learned in formatting still sticks here. You have all of the tools on your design ribbon. You have the font. If you go to your layout view, you actually can see your data, and while you're making changes, you can see how it's going to affect the layout and how nicely it looks. When you're in layout view, you also have the font area to make changes, and then on your home tab you also have items because you can work with your grid lines and the backfill color as well. I will close this report now. Do I want to save changes? Sure. What do I want to call it? Report 2? Sure. Now, let's go ahead and open up a report that we did have created already. I'm going to shrink this stuff out of the way, and I'm going to open up food orders grouped. This is something that we used the wizard to create earlier, and we have our order ID, and then we see the company and then what we ordered per company on that order ID. Let's say that you are in here about ready to print it, and then you realize, you know what? I don't think that that was the right quantity here. Wouldn't that be nice if you could scroll down, click a button, and actually open the form that you could use to edit that information? Let's add a control button. We'll go back into design view to add a button, and I will scroll down to the page footer area and find the button command. It's in the controls area of the design ribbon. Here it is. It's the button. When I click, it's going to pop a button there for me, and I have created a macro that I'm going to tie this to. To access this macro, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to choose properties first off, though I could double click or choose the property sheet button also to launch the properties. I want to add this to the on-click event, so I go to the Events tab. On-click is the first event. It's the most obvious event for a button. When I click my down arrow, I see all of the potential macros. I have one that I already created called Open Order Form. That's all I have to do here in the Properties sheet. When I click Close, I now can test this out. We should probably rename this first, though. How about Open Order Form? It doesn't display all the text, so I can resize this button. And let's go ahead and view this now. I need to go to the bottom of the page. So page down on my keyboard or Control End will take me there, or I could scroll as well. Open Order Form. It launches a dialog box first only because that's how I built the macro. Do not recommend ever doing this because it's a waste of your user's time. Okay, here we are. We are in our food orders, and we really could make a change to a specific item. We could just search for the order ID or whatever it is that we need to search for, and then we'd be able to adjust that information, and then we could refresh our report and print it out. We'll jump back into design view and take a look at some of the properties that we have. We already looked at the events, and we have this button selected, but what if we select the entire report by clicking in this square or selecting this drop down? Here I'll go to the All tab just so you can see. We have the data source, we have captions, we have the ability to display this on a SharePoint site, what our default view is. We can also control various pictures that we could import or embed into our report. Do I want to see a page header on all pages? Or maybe I don't want to see a picture on all pages. Now this is for the overall report, but if I were to select a grouping area, I could choose that I want to keep this information together at all times, or each new order ID header or each new grouping header, I could have a new page forced so that I can separate these different groupings into separate pages and hand them out to different people, perhaps. My point here is on your property sheet, because you're talking about something that displays on the screen, you have various items to select, but also because you're talking about printouts, you can do some of those commands that maybe you're used to doing in Word so that you don't have too much of your data separated or data together when it should be separated onto new pages. I'm going to close properties. I'm going to save my report and show you one last thing. We know we can print this out. We can do Control P on our keyboard, but what about emailing this to people? You can do that as well, or you can save it as a PDF file. The Office button in the upper left-hand corner allows us, of course, to print, but it also allows us to email. When I select this, I can choose how, as an HTML file, as a rich text format, as a text file, ooh, not really recommended, or as a snapshot. I'll choose HTML and then select OK. I do not have an HTML template, though you could use that, and you could choose default encoding or Unicode. I'll just go with the default, and it's outputting all the pages. I have 8 pages here. Your system has to be hooked up with an email program. Of course, Microsoft would recommend Outlook be the email program. But here I have a new message. If you're familiar with Microsoft Outlook 2007 or not, this is what it looks like. All of these pages were attached separately. I'll double click on this one, foodorderswizard.html, and I'll choose Open just to see what the information looks like. So it launched it into Internet Explorer 7.0. And here is that report. That's pretty nice, isn't it? Because now I don't have to just print it out. I can email it to people so they can get the joy out of the data the same way that I have. I mentioned you could also save this as a PDF. Back into that Office button in the Save As area, I could choose to save it as PDF or XPS, which is new to 2007. It incorporates XML with your Office documents. Your typical Office types of file types now have XPS, so it can integrate with XML. Of course, you have to have the add-ins and the programs like Adobe Reader or Adobe Acrobat installed in order for this to work. However, right here in the Save As, it's only really, 3 clicks away, and you can save your item as a PDF and email that out to your users as well. Let's take a look at what we accomplished here. We really did some neat things with that pivot chart. It allowed us to take information and compare it against each other and then print it out as a graphical representation. We inserted a subreport by using the subreport control, which allowed us to tie together data from a few different data sources. We also added a button so that we could open up a report, a form for editing, and we worked with a few of the properties that exist here in Access 2007. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.